Last week was me just talking for the 15th time. This week, me just talking for the 16th time. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lip. Okay, everybody, just talking number 16. Yeah, could have called it even just talking number 15 part 2, but you know what? I did that once on one of the other episodes. I think it was just talking 13. I split it into two pieces. Why? I had enough material to go along for more than one episode, so well, just make it more than one episode. And truly make it more than one episode. Distinguish it. I could have made this episode a little bit later in the year, but what's the point in that? Because the stuff that I wanted to talk about is still fresh in my mind from the episode before. That's why I just simply split it in two and called it two different things. And that's way I'm going to play it. I think that these just talking episodes are a lot of fun because it's stuff that happens right then, right there, and I just want to talk about it. And a lot of times you can write the stuff down, and there's plenty of times that if you just hit record on your phone, I would have maybe taken 15 minutes here or there and just sort of ranted and raved about what was going on at the moment. But why just spend that small amount of time on a subject that, if I combine it all, it would just make a much bigger picture? And that's what I wanted to do. Thus, just talking. The earlier versions, like 1 and 2, were literally that. I became hyper focused on things that were going on around me at the moment. And I tried to suck in as much stuff that was happening as I was just literally sitting down in my office and things were just popping into my head. But considering that as many things that are happening around me just while my mind is just spinning, how much better are things that I'm looking around when I'm just out and about throughout the normal day? Because there's always some weird stuff going on or something that just jumps out at you and you'd say, you know what, maybe I should talk about that. And that's what I'm doing. To make a long story short, too late. This is not a story episode. But I like the stuff that I went over last week. And I like the stuff that I'm about to do this week. Do I like it more? Do I like it less? Let's just say, I think, for the sake of argument, it's just as fun as the other stuff was. And I'm going to go ahead and go through these things because right now I'm skimming over my notes and I'm like, wow, I'm really glad I didn't talk about this one last week because I think it makes a more of a centerpiece if I talk about it for this episode, because you know how it is sometimes. It's like, I'm sorry. I know not everybody who listens to this is a wrestling fan, but I equate a lot of things to wrestling and movies. And WrestleMania has two nights now, so they need two main events. So essentially, this just talking episode kind of works like that. The other week was night one, and I had what I felt was the main event of that show was probably focused around the literal plane crash that happened the day I was recording it. And right now, I have another fairly sizable thing that I want to talk about that would be a main event for night two. And that's kind of how I'm going to work it, if that makes sense. It will as this episode goes on. But right now, I'm about to fill in the blanks. This fill in the blanks is a weird one, I think, because, well, I kind of thought of it spur of the moment, which I have to admit, a lot of the times when I do the fill in the blanks, they are just sort of things that pop in my head or things that I notice just looking around my house. And this is one of those cases. As I'm looking at um, oatmeal, yeah, of all things, oatmeal. The question that I have for this fill in the blanks is, what is my favorite kind of oatmeal? Well, I have always been a Quaker raisin and spice guy, and you had to add a little bit of the maple, the plain maple, into it for both, gives it a little bit more thickness and a little bit of flavor to it. But I'm also not at all shy to say that I also like the date walnut and raisin too. That's also a good one. So the answer to the question, that empty blank space, would be, it would be raisin and spice. I like that the most. But you have to add a little bit of the maple walnut, the maple cinnamon in there too. So the question was, what is my favorite kind of oatmeal? And on a winter day, without a doubt, the blank is filled with raisin and spice with a little bit of maple, uh, brown sugar. That definitely went a different way than I would have expected it to go. But now it is time for the main event of Just Talking number 16. Much like last week, I actually started with the plane crash because that was literally happening real time as I was talking about it. The plane had crashed and did damage and it was horrible. And I was literally watching the news right before I went on and started recording the episode. Right now it's February 6th, 2025, and I'm going to take the time stone and I'm going to move it back just a couple of days to start this. It was actually January 23rd, 2025. Now, the fun part about this is you have to really appreciate my position as I'm going to go about telling this. Now, I tried to think of a way to sort of make the picture very visual so you can see what's going on. And it turns out that I have to use a clock in order to make that work. It has to be an analog clock. You know, number 12 on the top, the 6 on the bottom, the 9 on the left, and the 3 on the right. And all the numbers in between corresponding going around clockwise. It's the only way that I can get the visual picture and give it to you. So, hear me out now. If you're looking at my house from the street, there's 4 corners, and I'm on one of the corners. Now, if we use the street itself as 12, looking straight ahead from my house, 6 behind my house, 9 to my left, and 3 to my right, you can see the visual clock of the intersection on my corner. Now, it's on an off road, a minor road, which of course is just to the right, or 3 o'clock, of a major road. Now, that major road is, since we've been living here for the last 5 years, has had a lot of accidents, some minor, some major, right at the intersection, the next block up from my house. Just happens a lot. Now, at the intersection where I live, there's a clear blind spot at 12 o'clock. And there have been plenty of opportunities over the last 5 years for accidents to happen, and even a couple that I avoided. But truthfully, it's not the best spot in the world. And as of recently, the last couple of I can't even say months. It's really weeks. It's no more than 6 weeks. 12 o'clock. There has been a couple of accidents. Now, if you move from 12 o'clock to about the corner that's on the right, which would be about at 2 o'clock, there is a pharmacy at around that 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock range on that corner. About 10 o'clock is a house, and that house sits in a spot where it can be real tricky to see sometimes. And that is where I've seen multiple almost accidents, near misses. And, well, in the last several weeks, I actually saw a couple of accidents. One that was actually a car during a snowy day actually smacked into the fence at the house that's at about 10 o'clock. Um, then there was an incident during school time, because that's the worst time, because the parking that the teachers do is just nonsense, because sometimes they will park along the side of that house that is at 10 o'clock. But the problem is there is no shoulder. So they're just sort of parking in the street, and cars trying to go through cannot see anything that is to their right, or what would be the left, looking at the intersection like a clock. 9 o'clock, can't see it. And so there was an accident there during the snowy weather where a person actually smacked into the fence of that neighbor who's across the street from the pharmacy. But the accident that I'm actually wanting to talk about is the one that happened on January 23rd, which was not that long ago from now as I'm recording. And there's parts to this accident that make me put my hand up against my chin and go, Turns out that the accident that happened there was uh, fairly rough fender bender. The accident was nice and smacked into the car, and the car was lost. I believe it was a tie rod and my mechanical engine. No how would say that it was a tie rod end or ball joint that popped on the vehicle, so there was no driving. Now, typically, in a situation like that, there was just some damage to the vehicle, and that's really all that that was going on. Turns out that this incident had the police show up, and they took a report, and the car sat. How long? Sat for a while. It was at least 5 hours that the car sat in front of my house, which would be about 5 o'clock on the clock. Now, the police came, they towed the vehicle, and it was gone. But it sat, like I said, from about 1:30 till about 6:30 in front of my house. Now, we're going to take the time stone and we're going to go backwards, because there were no injuries in this accident. The car was banged up, and that was really it. But now, we went to use the time stone now, and we're going to go back to my mother's birthday last year, September 12th. Turns out that some crazy lady was in the parking lot and backed into my relatively new car and smacked up the passenger side door, turning me into the Red Hulk, who I'll eventually see soon this month. Just had to throw that out there. Called the police because the lady was trying to leave. The first thing that they told me was, "Is there anybody hurt?" Nope. Okay, we're not sending the police. We're not going to gather any information. You just have to figure it out on your own. And I was like, all right, this lady's not giving me any information. So how am I going to deal with this situation? You're on your own, pretty much, they told me. If nobody's hurt, you're beat. Now, back to the January situation. There was nobody hurt. No ambulance, no fire truck, none of that stuff. And lo and behold, the tow truck was not called by the police because had it been, it would have probably been removed. I'm saying the car that was in front of my house would have been taken away within an hour and a half, 2 hours. But this was 5 hours. I clocked it. I was watching when the accident happened, and then at 6:30, when the tow truck decided to come and pick up the car. So clearly, the car that was in the accident that got the most damage had to call for their own personal tow truck to take their car to wherever they took it. So, my question then becomes, why did the police show up there, but not at my accident when the lady who hit me was trying to leave? Fortunately for me, and unfortunately for her, we had the same car insurance. So when she went and put in her claim, telling her lies about what happened to her vehicle, and then me telling the truth about what actually happened, and the fact that our insurance was the same, they immediately said, okay, we hear the situation, we see the pictures that you sent us, which was me, and they were like, you are clearly in the right. Normally, I would have to have put out a huge deductible, like $500 if it was an accident, whether it was my fault or not. But since it wasn't my fault and it was the same insurance, they got her for the deductible and the rental car and the repairs in general. So it worked out in my favor without the police there. But let's say this person didn't share my insurance. Let's say this person didn't have any insurance at all and they left. Now what? I'm stuck with a car, and the problem was my car at the time of the accident had less than 5,000 miles on it. Yeah. So I was not a very happy person, and I would have been absolutely miserable had I had to deal with all that situation without the police. It would have just been a mess, especially considering that I was just a few days away from having my bicep repair surgery, and everything was just sort of just slipping right through the cracks. It was just terrible. Just terrible. So, what I would really want to know is just talking. I mean, maybe the police kind of should have shown up. And maybe, granted, I know people are going to say, oh, it's Philadelphia, it's dangerous, there's all kinds of things going on. The police have much better things to do. They might. But at the moment, when I was in that situation, which just so happens to have been at a supermarket very near where the plane crashed last couple days ago, by the way, um, there wasn't any major incident going on, and there clearly was police officers when I went to go talk to them after the incident, and they could have stopped by and helped me out, but I just don't understand what the policy was about and why that was the way it was. But in the end, it worked out anyway. What are you gonna do? Sit back and watch, pretty much. Speaking about police, or more so inmates, I have a confession to make to everyone listening to this show, and it's kind of weird and it's kind of funny at the same time. At least it's funny to me. The parties that may have been used for my entertainment in this aspect, let me explain, probably would think that I'm a little bit off. Now, granted, while I worked in the jail, I had 3 bid posts in my 5, 6 years that I worked before I got hurt. I had 3 bid posts. One bid post was my first bid post was the psychiatric observation cell officer. I'm not going to get into too many details, but I will say this. It required me to be one on one with an individual inmate who was having who was in psychological distress, and I was supposed to write down all of their actions every 10 minutes. The other bid post that I had, which was probably my favorite bid post, I tried to get this bid post once before I actually was able to win it. Um, and that was to be the officer who was in charge of Corridor A. One hallway was my hallway. That was my favorite post. I enjoyed it very thoroughly, and I could tell you a whole story about Corridor A and why I took the post. And, you know, as I'm thinking about it, I might just tell that story. That's a story that I should tell. And I think that maybe, just maybe, because all these stories that I'm working on for later this year, maybe this one might be one that I might tell as well. But that was my second bid post. My third and final bid post was an overnight bid post where I would work 2 different blocks. I would work either Delta Alpha or Delta Bravo, depending on the group of officers who were on and off that night. If it was one color group, I would work one side. If it was the other color group, I would work the other because I was a relief officer between the two. I can say I made my most money. I did the least amount of work, but I also got injured. So throwing that into the equation sort of makes it, well, I almost should have stayed at Corridor A. But before I got those bid posts, I was like any of the other officers who didn't have a bid post, which means I was a person who they would use to fill in the blanks. What a wonderful way to put it. They would put me and all the other officers who didn't have bid posts in other spots in order to fill up the roster. Now, many a times I would be a utility or yard officer and help work the yard when the inmates were outside, or and then you would also help them with dinner and things of that nature. And then there was the block officers who are not bid officers. You just get assigned to work a housing unit. Now, there's been many a nights over that time that I've been assigned a housing unit on my 2 to 10 or 6 to 2 shifts when I was working. Now, the thing about this is, I would be sitting there sometimes and paying attention to what was going on, but it's a long day, and sometimes your mind drifts to places. And my mind occasionally would drift to a certain spot. I'm almost embarrassed to admit it, but I am not a young guy at 46. I'm Generation X. I'm a young Generation X, but Generation X nonetheless. So I'm in that generation whose parents and aunts and uncles were fans of the greatest musician of all time, in theory, and in practice, Elvis Presley. I think you may know where I'm going with this if you're of a certain age. But if you're not, you're going to get there when I arrive at the station. You'll understand. As I'm sitting on the housing unit or the block, and inmates are walking back and forth, doing their various nefarious, sometimes, activities, um, and I would be watching, and I would see them walking around, milling around, talking amongst each other, going in their cells, moving around. Sometimes I would imagine that they would all just stop everything they were doing, go back up in front of their individual cells, go in, and then come back out and start singing. But not just any song. I could envision them singing Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock. And I feel bad, but at the same time, it was funny to think about it. I always thought to myself, every time I got on a block, at least once a week, if I was on a block, the thought would pop in my head. Just one time, fellas, one time, just break out into a song and sing Jailhouse Rock. Just once. That's all I needed to do. One time. And if you did it one time, I would stand up, I would call the captain, and I'd say, I'm done. It's over. I'm finished. I have been complete. The inmates on my block sung Jailhouse Rock. I can go. I wanted that one time. Of course, if they did that, they would probably get in trouble because people would be like, oh, they're doing some crazy stuff on the block, and they would try to shut down the whole jail and things like that. But just once, for my own personal entertainment, I would have liked to have seen the inmates on my block start singing the Jailhouse Rock. Just one time. That's just once. That's all it would have taken. All it would have taken. And that would have just made my career. Not it would have made my career to see it. And there's plenty of times when I would be looking at guys, and in my mind, I'd be like, all right, I can see you singing, and I can definitely see you singing, and I can definitely see you guys dancing. It's like, on the old cell block, just dancing to the Jailhouse Rock, man. I could. I'm sorry. I could just see it. Even right now, as I'm doing this recording, in my mind, I'm looking at these guys, all in their brown clothes, just dancing around on the top and the bottom level of the cell block, just singing. I just, I'm sorry. But I'm looking at it right now. I'm visualizing it, and it's just it's all I can think about right now. Oh my goodness. Give me a minute. I had to stop the entire recording for a minute to regain my composure. And I'm barely doing it. But let me tell you, I definitely hardened criminals break out in the dance. I'm gonna pee myself a weapon. Oh, oh my goodness. All right. I think we're together now. I hope so. I don't know. Let me see if I can get through this show after that. Oh man, I went from going to the ultra serious to the ultra ridiculous. My goodness, like I just I can't even reach the button to hit pause, so I can regain composure. To the children's rock. Oh man. Ooh. Okay, I think I'm better now. And the only way I can do this in order to get myself back on track a little bit is, well, go to a little bit of wrestling. Just a little bit. Last week's episode aired on the night of the Royal Rumble, one of WWE's big four events. The winners of the Royal Rumble get an opportunity to wrestle for a title, a world title, both men and women's. Whew. And the winners of the Royal Rumble were a returning Charlotte Flair, who had just came back from being out for like a year and a half after she tore her ACL, and she was able to win the Rumble. And no, Jay Uso, one of Roman Reigns' cousins, won the men's Royal Rumble. Bit of a surprise, but that's not what I want to talk about as far as the Royal Rumble goes. I want to talk about the two champions who were in the Royal Rumble, who, in my opinion, had a very interesting night. The first champion that I'd like to talk about is one of the new women's champions that we have. WWE decided that there needed to be a mid-card title. Now, to describe mid-card title, obviously world champion is the top of the ticket, the highest titles you can have in a wrestling company. Then there's usually some other titles, lower grade titles, almost titles that they use as sort of stepping stones to see how a wrestler will do and if they may be able to make that next step to the world title. In WWE, those mid card titles for the men have always been in the last several years, the United States Championship and the Intercontinental Championship. Those things were usually those stepping stone titles that meant that these guys are on the top tier, but they're not quite at the very best yet. Now, in the last year, in fact, last few months, since WWE's gone to Netflix, they've had tournaments, two of them on Raw and on SmackDown, where they decided to make mid card titles for the women, which makes sense because there's so many good wrestling women out there in the WWE that you need to do something with them. And this mid card title thing is brilliant. So they created a U.S. and an Intercontinental Championship for the women. Great titles. The first ever U.S. Women's Champion is Chelsea Green. No, yeah, U.S. Champion, Chelsea Green. And the first Intercontinental Champion is Lyra Valkyria, if I'm saying it right. I hope I am. She's really good. And she's the subject of the first thing that I want to talk about because the two champions that I want to bring up are both mid card champions and they're both Intercontinental champions. The women's Intercontinental champion and the men's Intercontinental champion, who are both in the Royal Rumble. Had some pretty interesting times inside there. Now, Lyra, the women's Intercontinental champion, came in very early and had what could have been a real bad situation. She was wrestling and she had a malfunction of her wardrobe. Apparently, her wrestling gear that covered up her chest goes around her neck and ties up in the back. It turns out that early, very early, when she entered the ring, her gear came loose and the top came down. In the process, she was trying to fix it, but a very smart lady who was in there, Liv Morgan, a former world champion, saw that Lyra was having some issues and she immediately helped solve the problem. How? Did she, in the middle of the ring, tie off her wardrobe? No. She made it part of the match. And she took the Intercontinental Champion, Lyra, hit her from behind, driving her off into the corner where she could lay down. And the referees helped her fix her ring gear. And she came back and everything was fine. That was quick thinking by a former champion. And I love when you see stuff like that because that just shows somebody's paying attention, knows that something's not right, and came up with a solution that was logical and kept the flow of the match working. Lyra Valkyrie came back and had what I thought was an excellent match after that. And Liv Morgan is really the cause of making that wardrobe malfunction, which could have been much more embarrassing and much, much worse. She contained it like instantly. It was brilliant. Next Intercontinental Champion in the men's Royal Rumble, Braun Breaker, son of legendary wrestler Rick Steiner of the Steiner Brothers. Now, his boy, Braun Breaker, he had a crazy match and had maybe the move of the night in the whole match. Didn't win the Rumble. It was Jey Uso who won it. But a YouTuber or influencer by the name of Speed was put into the Royal Rumble because one of the other wrestlers who was on their way out got injured before he got to make it to the Rumble. So Speed was given the call by Triple H, go on out in the Rumble. And so he did. And in the process, Braun Breaker broke him in half with his spear. Just killed him. It was like, I don't think this man's going to live for this thing. One of those situations where it's like, oh, it can't hurt that bad. Oh, yeah, it did. It really, really did. Poor guy got literally broken in half by that spear. It was just insane. But the fact that Speed was a good sport and did it, and it was fun. It was a good place. Those two IC champs made for a great Royal Rumble, and I'm glad that Lyra Valkyrie did not have too much of an embarrassing moment. Let's see what we got here. More stuff than I could have imagined. Man, I might have to hold off on one thing. Oh, man, I got all this extra material. Still, well, how are we going to work with it? The stories that I will tell. I'll go there. I was very much intrigued by a couple of stories that I've had, and I didn't know how I wanted to present them, but I knew that at this point in time that I did want to tell these stories. And it was crazy because each individual piece to the story, as they were going through my mind, the story got bigger and bigger and bigger, and to the point where it was hilarious. And I started thinking that these stories have like a domino effect. And it's such a domino effect where if I pull one piece out of the story, I recognize that that piece is necessary for the telling of the other story. I may have brought it up in a little bit of a way, but I have ultimately decided that I wanted to tell the story of there's like 5 or 6 different stories here, and it's really, really, really crazy that all this stuff. When I think about it, it all comes together, and I started going backwards from the point where I thought, okay, I can start my story here, and then I can move it there, and I can move it here, and I can move it there. But this is a gigantic jumble of a couple of years of life that I can't really separate. There is no oil and water where you can see a clear divide. This is more like sugar and coffee. You put that stuff in there, it mixes all the way up. And then you add a little bit of cream to it. In fact, maybe even coffee's not the way I can use because coffee is just, you don't put as much stuff in it. So maybe tea. That might be more the speed of what I'm talking about here. First of all, you have the water, and then you add the tea bag, and then you realize that you need some lemon, and then you got to put some sugar in it, then you got to put some milk in it, and then you got to stir it all up because all these things are all part of one big story, and you can't have one without the other. Like love and marriage situation, you can't have one without the other. It's like, and so I have decided that I was trying to break these pieces down in and just have individual stories, but I discovered, like I said, it's impossible. It is completely impossible for me to separate these instances one from another because they're all part of the same story. And it's a story that I've never told in its entirety. And I thought about it. I've told pieces of the story, but I've never put all these pieces together. And I'm going to do it in May. The story is going to be released. I mean, this stuff to the point where it's almost I could probably write a book about these 2 years, and maybe that's not a bad idea either. But I'm going to tell you the pieces, not necessarily how they fit together, because, as I say, that's going to be the story on its own. The pieces would be how I became a manager at Wawa, my cereal box collection, me getting sick. Um, what else fits in that story? Whew, my yeah, I'm thinking those are the big three that came to mind, and then it made me think about my 11-day vacation where I ate pizza. How does pizza, an 11-day vacation, a deadly sickness that I had, me getting into management, how do all these things work together? And my cereal box collection as well. Like, how did all this stuff just sort of mangle itself together? Because there's big pieces of what was going on with my cereal box collection that were happening during the time of me being sick. There was me getting into management prior to getting sick. There was um, some weird, bizarre stuff that happened before I went on my vacation that washed up when I got done with my vacation. And all this stuff happened in 2 years. And 2 years this stuff happened. And realistically, I wanted to tell the story about me being sick. That's where I'd started off. And when I thought about it, that's where the dominoes started to fall into place. Like, well, I can't really tell the story of me getting sick unless I tell the story about my vacation. Because if I didn't tell the story about that vacation, it wouldn't have moved the progression to make it to the point where I got around to getting sick. I couldn't tell my whole story about my cereal box collection without this little chunk of stuff that happened during the time I was sick. It's just, there's a lot, as they say, a lot to unpack. And I can begin this whole thing with the cereal boxes, which is funny, but I can't finish unless I get through the sickness. And I can't tell the story. It's just, it's a really confusing situation. But at the same time, it's a good story, but it's a long story. Like, I really, if I was gonna, because every single time I started working on how this story comes together, I started realizing that as I was going backwards, that 1 month turned into two, turned into three, turned into four, turned into five, turned into six, turned into 24. So it legitimately started in 2002 at the beginning of the year. And as that year progressed, it moved me right along until I ended up going to the point where I ended up getting sick and rolling around. And it was something crazy to behold. It really was. And I can't wait to tell that story because it's such a good story to me. It really is. Really, really is. And I don't want to blow it and tell you too many pieces about it, but I will say this. When I tell this story in these pieces, because I wanted it to be one show, but I know it's impossible unless I decide to go ahead and just let it be a 2 hour or longer show, potentially. It could very easily run me that long if I were to just sit down and talk about everything in that perspective. But I think that in order for a person to really digest it, you really need to eat it in small bites. And I think that if I start telling piece by piece by piece by piece, I can probably get through the story without much difficulty. But look for it towards the end of April, beginning of May. I'm going to start talking about this story. And like I said, keep in mind, these are the elements. Me becoming a manager of Wawa, me getting sick, me going on a 11-day vacation to eat pizza, my cereal box collection. Those are like the big pillars. And then along the way of each of these big pillars, there's small, intricate little stories that go into all of these things. And because there's stuff that was around me being sick, stuff that was around my cereal boxes, stuff that was around the vacation, and stuff that was around me becoming a manager. All these little clumpy things that were all in there, and they all sort of fit together to make one big picture. And you got to hear it because I think I might have told without people who actually lived through the story with me. I don't think I've actually ever sat down and told how it all unfolded, but I'm about to. Excuse me, let me get a little bit of Dr. Pepper here because I'm running a little bit later than I expected, but that's okay because, like I said, I thought that this was going to be these two episodes were going to merge because there's just so much in there. Dr. Pepper, I love it. I have two more things that I want to talk about, and I'm going to be brief about them because, well, I didn't even get to the third one. There's even more. I'll have to do that at a different time. Or, no. Let me see. Because I want to get through these. If I did another one, mm-mm. Nope. Excuse me. I'm going to touch on these and then I'm going to move on. We'll start with a little bit of the Mandela effect. Something that I didn't really know much about. And granted, I like conspiracy theory stuff. And I look at it from a different perspective than some people. Some people hear about stuff like the Mandela effect, like aliens and conspiracies with JFK and stuff like that. Now, I am the person who thinks of it like one of my favorite movies, The Negotiator. I will always look at things like this. Um, Kevin Spacey has the best line in the world in that movie, and it is about understanding situations. You can apply it to anything if you pay attention to what he says. Him and Samuel L. Jackson were doing dialogue about history and how Kevin Spacey is a history buff. Samuel L. Jackson, of course, this is all just sort of, as I'm saying this, I'm just sort of paraphrasing. Samuel L. Jackson tells him, you can't believe everything you read because Kevin Spacey told him that he's a history buff. Now Kevin Spacey replies by saying, "I genuinely read all the books on a subject, and then I take it on my own to determine what actually happened." You can do that with all these conspiracy things. Excuse me. Read up on a whole bunch of different subjects on a subject, books on a subject, videos, whatever. And then you can sort of see what sort of shakes out, and then you can decide for yourself what is true. That's pretty much how I did all my research for um, my fitness um, gym rat phase. I would watch every video I could, and I would watch different people, and I would listen to what they had to say. And when they said the same thing about a certain subject, I would then consider that something to pay attention to. And when I started seeing two or three or four different people saying the same thing about a certain subject, then I know, okay, that's right. That makes sense. And when somebody's a little off or different, I would then see how many people disagreed with that person, if that makes any sense. I would find out why they disagreed with that person and see if other people disagreed with that person for the same reason. And then I would decide for myself whether or not to try that supplement or do that exercise. Now, the Mandela effect, I've only watched a little bit of footage on it. I haven't really dug into it or did much research, but why am I talking about it? Because I actually watched the Mandela effect phenomenon, I believe it was called, on Tubi yesterday. And upon doing so, I learned a little bit about the Mandela effect, the fact that things they say were a little different than what we remember them because something changed along the way and we remember things differently. Um, it's an interesting fact. Interesting stuff. Not fact. I can't say it's fact. I only saw the one thing so far about it. And I haven't really done any more research except for the fact that I saw something that disturbed me a little bit. And because of that, I actually am the person who usually watches these documentaries once, and then I'll watch another documentary on a similar subject, and then I'll go back to the one I watched. So I'm sort of like going back and forth, usually a couple different of these documentaries. But in the middle of watching the Mandela Effect phenomenon, I stopped what I was doing and rewound and watched a certain section again because it's one thing to say that people can't quite remember things the same way and they think things have changed. But this group that has this really the world's largest super collider, it's called the CERN group, uh, we're doing some weird things that made me go, which means that really my research is going to start looking into them a little bit more than even the phenomenon for my own curiosity. The CERN group, where they have this giant super collider, the biggest one, where of course a super collider is a giant machine that they use to take atoms and smash them together. And that is what they're thinking created the phenomenon of the Mandela effect because they're opening up weird gateways and things of that nature. But this Stern group had this weird set of things that are going on that I want to find out a little bit more about. One of them is they have a statue in front of their building, And it's not just any statue, it's a statue of Shiva. Now, if you know anything about Shiva, what Shiva is a goddess of destruction. Now, if you have a super collider and you're throwing things together and you're blowing up atoms, that is massive destruction, right? But Shiva is also sometimes considered a little evil. So, if you're using a statue of evil and you're destroying atoms, is it because you want to go destroy good stuff? Makes me scratch my head a little bit. Then, this is where the extra research comes in. The people who were talking said that the building that they are working from with this huge super collider is at was actually, um, strangely enough, above what used to be a temple to Abaddon, and that's what made me hit rewind. Now, I know this episode's getting a little bit long, but I need to talk about this because this one made me go, Stop the video, back up, watch it again. Stop the video again, back up, watch it again. Abaddon. That's a problem. A real problem for me. A little bit worrisome. Now, if this has any truth at all that they are built their building on what was a temple to Abaddon, that's a big problem. That's why I need to do a little bit more research. Now I need to tell you who Abaddon is if you don't know. Now, I'm going to tell you that I am a Christian and I have read the Bible cover to cover twice and have read many verses from many different books inside the Bible. I'm not saying that I have a doctorate in theology, but I do have an understanding that I'm not going to say that many people don't have, but there's probably a bunch of people who may not have the same understanding of the Bible as I do. Having said that, from the age of 10, probably my favorite book in the Bible was Revelations. And people think that's a little sick because it's a little apocalyptic, but it's more modern in a sense. If you really pay attention to the book of Revelations, everything before it is usually in the past, and Revelations is really looking at a future. Not that I want to preach to everybody right now. I'm just giving you an overview of the book itself, because that's the idea. Revelation, it's showing us stuff. Okay? Okay. Now, back to Abaddon. He appears in the Bible, in Revelations, and he also appears in earlier books, much, much earlier, as in Old Testament early. And the first time, I'm going to tell you that in a minute, but the second time, I'd rather tell you because you may not understand the second time. There was a point where the Israelites were in some trouble and God decided to help them out because they were surrounded by an army of 185,000 soldiers. And God released Abaddon. And he wiped out 185,000 soldiers. Now, we're going to go back to Revelations before I go in the earlier part, because if I tell you that, you'll know who he is, and that's why I want to give you a little more context. Now, Revelations, I'm sorry I didn't actually pull up the actual verse, but in Revelations it mentions Abaddon, and it mentions another name that he's known by, and that is Apollyon. And he's also called the Destroyer from time to time. Now, he is the demon that in the end times is going to come out of a crack in the earth from the pit. And with him, he's going to bring some horrible monsters. Heads like horses and tails like scorpions. And when they sting you, they won't kill you, but you'll continue to feel the pain. That is in Revelations. So this guy, Apollyon, has some very nasty friends, to say the least. But now to put him in ultimate context, so you know who he is for certain. Most people have heard this story, and this is the one that'll be the clincher to let you know who he is. Apollyon was in Egypt at one time in the Exodus, and he was the one who killed the firstborn of Egypt. That guy, the Death Angel. So the CERN company essentially built their super collider and their headquarters above a temple to the Death Angel with a statue of Shiva, the destroyer, the goddess of destruction. Some ain't right. I'm just saying, some ain't right. It's like, forget the other stuff in my mind, all about the things that are slightly different. I'd be more concerned about the apocalyptic potential of releasing Abaddon. That's a problem for me and for everybody else if they mess around with their super collider and open up some sort of gateway, and all of a sudden, we don't want any part of that. None at all. None at all. As I would say, save that for after the rapture. Don't want any part of that. Not right now. Now, on that note, I didn't even ring the bell. I was so excited to get to this part of the show, but now I'm going to ring it now, and main event is over. Now I'm going to go to the football picks again, but they're the same as last week. Nothing has changed. I don't want the Eagles to win, and I don't want the Chiefs to win, but I expect the Chiefs to win 28-24 this week at the Super Bowl. That's all I'm going to say about that. Either way, I'm not going to be happy. But, of course, that's just the way it is. 32 teams enter week one. Only one fan base is going to be happy at the end of the season. That's it. That's the way it works. Now, it's time for the Spear of the Week. The only thing I could possibly think of for the Spear of the Week, without question, has to be the fact that that movie that I watched, the documentary, Mandela Effect, that I really wasn't too keen on or aware of. I think that the fact that that even exists is kind of weird. And I think that I would want to give those people the Spear of the Week because my life was a lot better before I knew about that. especially considering that that documentary came out last year. So it's not even 24. It's not even 12 months old after its release. And I was like, man, oh no, oh no, we need to spear those guys big time. So, Spear of the Week, creators of the Mandela Effect phenomenon, no doubt. All right, I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly because I have burned up way more time than I had expected. The painting you see in front of you is called Black Drop. Well, why is it called Black Drop? I'm not going to lie to you. I wanted to just simply make the borders of this painting black, but I squeezed a little too hard on the paint, and lo and behold, I got that black drop that you see, just splattered all over my arm. And because of my art style, there's never anything wrong. It's just unexpected. So I kept it. I worked around it, and I used it to make those lines you see that go all the way up to the top of the painting. And everything's fine. I just called it what it is. I dropped that black spot, and now it's Black Drop. It's what it is. Now, you can check me out on Instagram at Philip Henderson5102. I'm out there on X, the Facebook group. I said it before, and I'll say it again. Join us. There is always room for more. Always. Especially for that one person who thinks that they want to get on. Please join us on the Facebook group, the LIP Facebook group. If you have not already subscribed to at Phil the Lip, do so. Check out the rest of my content and plenty of other shows that are on there right now. But it is time for the words of wisdom. Hold on, they are on the way. Here they come. Much like this painting, Black Drop, I can tell you that I made that mistake and turned it into what I consider pretty good painting. I think I like it. Worked out for the best. But some people take things that are very, very simple and make them very, very difficult. And for those people, I simply say, you make things as simple as putting sugar in a cup of coffee seem as complex as performing brain surgery. One more time. You make things as simple as putting sugar in a cup of coffee seem as complex as performing brain surgery. We don't need that, right? No, we don't. And on that note, you'll be able to check me out on the next episode next week. So, for all of you who are listening, you need to remember that my name is Phil, and you've just listened to The Lip.